Welcome to the Rotary Club of Milwaukee. I am Club President Darren Miller, President and owner of JM Construction. As we gather virtually today, let's begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And now I'd like to welcome Brad Kalscher, partner with Michael Best and Friedrich, to give our invocation today. Brad?
Good afternoon, thank you all. When doing a little research for this and looking up Jesuit Groundhog Day prayers, I find out that February 2nd is actually not just Groundhog Day, but we are exactly 40 days after Christmas today. So it's a feast called Candlemas. And so in Germany, there's a long-standing tradition surrounding Candlemas festival. February 2nd was known as Dashtag, which is Badger Day, so it's appropriate with Mike doing our talk today. And so the Candlemas weather lore in Germany goes back at least 200 years, but is likely older and more widespread. A variation of the theme of the groundhog or the badger. In 1823, it was published in a book in Austria saying that if a badger is in the sun at Candlemas, he will have to go back into his hole for another 4 weeks. So that was brought over to Pennsylvania Dutch country with the Amish. And that's, I think, where the Groundhog Day tradition comes in. But to take it forward, a poem from British Isles about the Groundhog Day and Candlemas. If Candlemas Day be fair and bright, winter will have another fight. If Candlemas Day bring clouds and rain, winter won't come again. So I'm not sure if Phil or Jimmy saw their shadow today, but either way, we're getting out towards the end of winter. Amen.
Thanks, Brad. And I'd also like to say thank you to our rotating sponsors who support the work of our club. Their logos ran prior to the program start today, and they're also show up on our website. We'd like to highlight one of them today, Aiken & Sculptor, a personal injury law practice that provides clients with personalized service and a level of legal experience and knowledge that is more commonly found in larger firms. They devote the practice to representing people who have been injured and wronged by others. James Sculptor has been a member of our club since 2018. They have also supported our annual golf outing. Thank you to Aiken & Sculptor for their continued support of the club. If you're interested in having your organization become a rotating sponsor, reach out to Michelle in the Rotary office. You may have noticed that our links to our Tuesday and Thursday programming have changed this month. You no longer need to find the most recent email to link to our live programming events. You can now simply bookmark the Tuesday and Thursday programming access pages that are currently in our weekly emails in your web browser and have that access our programs each week. The pages will be updated weekly with the current program information. Contact Michelle in the Rotary office if you have any questions. This Thursday at noon, our snack program, we will welcome Tim Vargo and the Community Science and Research team at the Urban Ecology Center. They will be talking about biodiversity in our own backyards. For those missing our connections to fellow Rotarians, the leaner snack format makes it possible to feel more connected with each other on the call. Join us at 11:30 for a bit of informal connecting before the program starts at noon. The Coffee Connector is continuing to meet virtually this winter. This February gathering is next Thursday morning, February 11th at 7:30 a.m. See the link in this morning's email for the Zoom invitation or connect with that group on Facebook. And yet one more way to connect. We have heard across the organization that our members are missing the small interactions and new connections that are formed at our in-person events. While we can't wait to get back to meeting in person, in the interim, we have introduced the Pairing Connections program. Sign up each month to be randomly paired with another Rotary member. It will then be up to the individuals to schedule a virtual or socially distanced meetup or meetups throughout the month. New matches are now being put together for February, so you can connect with a different member each month. Get to know someone new or reconnect with an existing friend. Participation is optional, but strongly encouraged to help continuing growing valuable relationships within our organization. Sign up by clicking on the link in this morning's email. And now I'm going to turn the program over to Jamie Reeve, Senior Vice President of Wealth Strategies at Northern Trust Company, to introduce our speaker today. Jamie.
Thank you, President Darren, and great to be together with so many of my fellow Rotarians today. And I'm really thrilled to have the opportunity to welcome back to our club Mike Knetter. Mike is the president and CEO of the Wisconsin Foundation and Alumni Association. I'm not a Badger by education, but I'm a huge Badger backer. So welcome, Mike. A little bit about Mike for those of you who don't know him. It's interesting. He is a Hodag as he hails from Rhinelander. He's a Blue Gold as he graduated from UW Eau Claire. And he also went to Stanford for his economics degree. He was a professor of international economics at Dartmouth, and he served under President Bush first, that's HW, and President Clinton as the Council of Economic Advisors in both of their administrations. And then he returned to his native Wisconsin in 2002 as the Dean of the School of Business in Madison. And then since 2010, he has been the UW Foundation President and CEO. In addition to his roles there in Madison and across the state, he's a board member and chair of the investment committee, both at American Family Insurance as well as Neuberger Berman Funds. And importantly, he's a Green Bay Packers shareholder. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome back to the Rotary Club of Milwaukee, our friend, our favorite Hodag, Mr. Mike Knetter.
Well, Jamie, thank you for that generous introduction. Let me see if I can share my screen. Is this screen working
Looks
for
good.
people? Okay, I just am on the wrong page. All right, so thank you for that great introduction. I am in Rhinelander, Wisconsin, as I give this presentation. And I just want to put in a plug for Fishery Weekend, which is coming up on February 13th. We had a big ice fishing jamboree up here, and the ice is pretty thick. I see, gaggles of trucks congregating with campers out on the ice. And so far, nobody's gone through, but guys up here buy those Wisconsin-made winter suits that serve as a personal flotation device by Stryker Ice. I'd really encourage that if you're looking for something special for your significant other for Valentine's Day. Anyway, with that, a bit of fun, but I took note of the Pledge of Allegiance. That seems to be more important than ever these days, and I'm glad you guys have that tradition. That's a wonderful thing. What I'm going to do today is just quickly revisit predictions I made in January of last year, which were immediately dashed by the pandemic. Then we'll take a tour of what a pandemic economy really looks like. I'll give you some perspectives that I have on innovation, the Biden agenda, and the polarization that troubles so many people these days. And then I'll close with my 2021 outlook, and along the way, maybe throw in a few surprising and unorthodox slides, as I like to do. So, and I look forward to your questions. I'm going to try to wrap up quickly and get to them. So my 2020 predictions, I always come clean and try to grade myself and be honest about what I got right and wrong. But I'm going to say that last year they withheld grading entirely because of the pandemic. I was way off on everything, as just about everyone was. So I'm not going to really spend much time other than to say I do this regularly every year, and I try to own up to my mistakes. I'd say, obviously, the big mistake last year was I didn't expect the pandemic, and that did so many. It's really hard to know if my original forecast would have been reasonable ex-pandemic. I have no idea. So I did talk a little bit about forecast risks last year. I thought in particular the election would begin to weigh on the economy and especially the market as people began to see who was maybe the leader in the race. And of course, in January, we didn't know even who the primary winner would be for the Democrats. I thought Trump or Bloomberg would have been seen as business friendly, which is kind of important just to the overall backdrop. I tend to look at politicians and politics as, is a group going to side more with, focusing on protecting consumers and workers, or are they going to focus on making conditions good for businesses, which indirectly, the Reagan trickle-down idea does benefit workers and the job market if businesses are successful, right? So there's still some healthy debate about where you should fall on that spectrum. And of course, Biden, I would have said, was more neutral. And then other Democrats would spook markets because they would be heavily on the consumer and worker side of the ledger. I thought the combination of a tight labor market and our trade war would start to create price pressures, maybe putting the Fed in a bit of a bind where it might have to hike rates. That, of course, was dashed by the pandemic. And then I also said, there's the usual geopolitical wild cards. You never know what might happen. And of course, we do know what happened. We had a pandemic. I also talk always about, what are the things that keep me up at night? And one that's been on the list for a long time is global climate issues. Disclaimer, my degree is in economics, so I'm not the one to judge the details of that science. But as an economist, it makes perfect sense to me that pollution was free for far too long. We've had a lot of atmospheric change. I think there are real serious changes going on with our climate, and that will continue to be something that manifests in different ways. We don't know how the atmosphere might adapt to these changes naturally. You never know. But I think a little more caution might be in order. I worry a lot about the globally coordinated quantitative easing that central banks have been engaged in. It's sort of a new way for governments to kick the can of debt down the road, and it creates a big intergenerational transfer scheme. I'm not a big fan of that. And if central banks don't watch it, they're going to open the door for cryptocurrencies to be an even more important force in the economy, and they may regret that. Large deficit and debt to GDP ratios for many of the most advanced developed countries are indeed troubling given their demographics. I was worried a lot about the disruption of the post-World War II international order. Whenever things are in sort of a disequilibrium state there, you don't know how they're going to get put back together. Doesn't mean it couldn't have come out even better, but now we have a change of administrations. We'll see if it gets sort of put back together the way it was. And I was worried a lot about the erosion of trust in institutions that are important to the country and leaders. That probably came to a head on January 6th. But I'll admit I'm not sleeping any better. I don't feel like that's over. And the erosion of incentives to lead public institutions. These spotlight public jobs, whether it's elected officials or even other public sector leaders, chancellor of a big public university, they've become very distasteful because people are attacking you on all sides in social media. And those jobs, the pay hasn't gone up the way pay has gone up in the private sector for jobs of, let's say, equivalent talent. So if you look 30 years ago, maybe university president looked like a pretty attractive job. It's still financially rewarding, but certainly hasn't kept up with the way pay has moved in other sectors of the economy. And then the bad side of it is, I think the distasteful aspects of the job have increased a lot more. Just because of social media and all the scrutiny on those jobs. So those are things that were bothering me. And spoiler alert, I'm not going to have a slide like that this year because those are still the same things that really bother me today. So what about the year ahead? Well, let's think back, what was so great about the pre-pandemic expansion? What was fueling it? It was really easy money worldwide, low unemployment rates and growing participation. So people had a lot of disposable income. We had light touch regulation, and we're seeing a lot of that get reversed with Keystone Pipeline being exhibit A of that. But light touch regulation, people were able to get things done a little more quickly, and I think felt like the stance of regulatory agencies in many sectors were just a little bit more understanding of business as opposed to skeptical of business. That's certainly being reversed. Impact of tax cuts for some people was still driving healthy consumer spending, high levels of household wealth and consumer confidence, and yet no real sign of overheating. The inflation dog never barked. A lot of people thought it would come roaring back after the QE that accompanied the great financial crisis. It never did. So what happened to all that? Well, we had the pandemic, so let's take a tour of the data and see what a pandemic economy really looks like. I was bragging for quite a while about how stable the last recovery was in terms of real GDP growth, and annualized real GDP growth really was within a range of 1.75% to 2.75% year after year after year in that recovery. And of course, all that stability of GDP growth ended. And I think the reason for that stability of GDP growth is really would become more of a service economy, which is generally thought to be impervious to recessions. Well, we found out there is a shock that can destroy the service economy, and we just had it. So GDP collapsed on a quarterly basis, declined by about 33% in the third quarter and second quarter. And, we're on our way back from that, but it was still a really rough year overall. GDP closed the year down about 3.5% year on year. The unemployment rate, while it peaked near 15%, there's a bit of understatement in that. Some problems with how people fill out forms when they're temporarily unemployed. I think most astute observers at the Department of Labor would say probably the real rate of unemployment was actually about 22%, absent those accounting errors. And there's still probably about 0.6 of a percentage point difference between the currently reported 6.7 and an actual more likely 7.3%. But nonetheless, a pretty good snapback in the labor market if you look at the unemployment rate. But if you look at labor force participation rates, they're down about 2% from where they were pre-pandemic. So that unemployment rate recovery is masking a second issue in the labor market, and that is a lot of people have left the labor market, and I don't think we can say for sure whether they're coming back. So, we're probably more like 6 percentage points off peak employment pre-pandemic, and that tells you, I think, gives you a better indication of how much gap we still have to close yet in our economy. So speaking of closed, part of the problem with the labor market recovery will be a lot of businesses actually have closed, and so the connections between employees and employers that normally can be rekindled when the economy comes out of recession may not exist for a lot of our workers. So some people don't have a job to go back to, a much higher number than would be the normal case coming out of a recession. And so that'll be a headwind that's probably going to make it harder for us to close that remaining gap in the labor market. So the factors that'll shape the labor market recovery, again, to reiterate, the shortfall in employment is probably about 2 percentage points greater than the gap to the kind of full rate of unemployment because labor force participation is down. Getting back to full employment is going to be difficult because A, the pandemic's not over. B, the incentives to work do fall when we increase support for the unemployed. I'm not saying that's a bad idea. I'm just saying that's how incentives work. And so while not everyone is just sitting around waiting to collect unemployment, there are people, I can assure you, who when they can collect unemployment, and then they can do some other things on the side that actually help their economic situation that maybe aren't part of the formal labor market. Some people do choose to do that. And we shouldn't kid ourselves about that, but that isn't a reason to not support people. I tend to prefer these lump sum awards to people below a certain level of income as opposed to twiddling with the unemployment benefits per se. But people have many different points of view on that. And then many former employers are gone. So that's going to be a difficult aspect of recovery. The CPI. So you can read bull and bear cases on what's going to happen to the price level, and I won't represent them in totality, but I will say it could be a bit of a calm before the storm with, if we recover from the pandemic, probably a lot of the supply in the energy markets have been taken offline now. So we could see a resurgence in energy and other commodity prices pretty quickly. And there will be pockets of demand where the supply side of the economy has been battered enough that it probably won't be able to meet that demand. So we might have some pockets of higher inflation. So I would look carefully at commodities and then some of those services where supply may have been gutted, like restaurant dining. When people are able to go back out again, they may not have the same number of choices they had before, and that'll drive up prices at the places that they can go to. So I wouldn't be surprised to see inflation close the year above 2%, but we'll see. Interest rates very low. If you're planning to retire, that's kind of a daunting thing to look at. We'd like a little bit of security in our retirement, and boy, wouldn't it be nice to buy a 10-year bond, treasury bond, and earn 4 or 5%, and know you could count on that as kind of a stable part of your portfolio. That's gone. And so we're now driven to take different types of credit risk if we want to hold fixed income to fortify our incomes in retirement. You're not going to get much off the yield curve right now either. So that's seems to be a much more permanent feature of our economy, likely to persist for a while, based on Fed commentary. US and global equities, it really was America's decade, and the recovery from the pandemic, I think, only exaggerated the American technological lead. Oddly, the pandemic was really good for certain sectors of the US economy. And, as a result, a lot of wealth was created during the pandemic as the stock market recovered and reached new heights. And it remains on fire today as we speak. We've had some interesting little subplots in the stock market, which some of you may be curious about as well. Happy to take that up in questions, but I don't have any charts of GameStop or Bitcoin or silver this year. Household net worth, more than full recovery from the pandemic, not surprisingly, again, with what's happened with equity prices. So, which raises an interesting next point, which is consumer confidence remains very subdued. And, normally when you have all these things going where most people are actually working, inflation and interest rates remain low, wealth is at an all-time high, that would all drive a high level of consumer confidence. But as long as people are worried about virus transmission, and they're probably a bit exhausted from all the measures everyone's had to take in this pandemic, people are getting tired. It's time for all of us, I think, to dig deep for a few more months here and try to get through this unscathed and keep our best game faces on. But there's also, in addition to the pandemic and maybe the tiring nature of that, I think there's a lot more deep structural uncertainty right now in our economy. Our monetary and fiscal policy seem to be in a really different place than they've been in a long time. We have more political uncertainty than I think I've ever seen in my lifetime, and not just uncertainty, but rancor and global institutions. All those things are kind of in uncharted waters. And just like businesses, I think consumers don't like that level of uncertainty. When there's a lot of economic uncertainty, business confidence tends to go down as well. So we'll see how this evolves. If it's really only the pandemic and the average consumer actually doesn't care about monetary and fiscal policy or politics or global institutions, the pandemic fades, confidence could snap back quickly, and we could see demand charge ahead. So where do we go from here? It's important to remember the US economy is a big ship. We've got a recovery underway. It's going to gather momentum as the virus abates. There's no doubt about that. And, there's getting to be, maybe pockets of doubt about just how much the virus will abate and what will happen with these new variants. But I do think we'll get a handle on it and we'll be in better shape. Three things to watch that I think will really shape the trend over the year ahead, and in some cases beyond. I think we've already seen a COVID-induced productivity surge. If you think about it, GDP was down 3.5%. Employment probably dropped more like 7% over the course of the year. That means productivity was pretty high last year. We got a lot done with less labor input. And that was achieved through a lot of innovation that's going to stay with us. The Biden administration policy shifts will become increasingly important as the year goes on, whether done by executive order, of which we've had many, or actual legislation that goes through the Congress. And then the polarization of beliefs and political priorities, I think, will continue to rattle around and possibly rear its head in unexpected ways. And how that evolves will also play an important role in how people are feeling and what we're doing. So the COVID-induced invention and innovation, you're probably tired of hearing about it. I won't belabor it, but whether it's telemedicine, remote work, remote education, people doing new things in the home, more shopping from delivery-based services like Amazon, it's really been a revolution in how we do things. And, what's interesting about that, necessity is still the mother of invention. And the disruption and urgency that the pandemic unleashed created waves of changes in how we supply goods and services and in what people wanted to consume in this new world that will have lasting effects. So again, with remote, you've got work, medicine, education, business, all kinds of new options that we can do remotely that will change potentially business as usual post-pandemic. And then also the things we've learned to do at home, some of which we may go back to the old ways, but we don't know. So the supply chain side changes create new options. And it also, I would say, made some options that existed before the pandemic much better, much faster than they would have been otherwise. And probably this remote meeting is one example of that, right? Whether the demand changes persist is harder to predict, but I will say this, people talk a lot about consumption patterns being driven a lot by people's habits. If the pandemic was a 3-month affair, that's maybe not enough to change your habits and tastes. If it's a 15-month affair, I would expect it's going to have bigger, more lasting changes on how people want to do things. So I wouldn't discount the possibility that, we're not just going to go back to the old ways of doing things. And the longer this goes on, the more likely it is that many of these new innovations become the way of the future. So we have this opportunity, I think, to keep the best of these changes in both supply and demand, and that's going to drive a real resurgence in productivity growth on the one hand and quality of life on the other. There are always winners and losers in these things, and the winners, obviously, technology companies, tech-savvy employees, online retail and content delivery. Large companies did much better than small companies because, they're more delivery-based and B2B in nature. Suburban areas and rural areas probably benefit at the margin in real estate markets as people question the long-term viability of cities and maybe reassess the desirability of living in a city. And that's not just pandemic related, but maybe some of this other tense overlay we have of social issues that have led to problems in cities. Losing ground, small businesses and their employees, especially in the service sector, leisure and hospitality, restaurants, children in poor learning environments really suffered during this period. I think it's well known that women in the workforce probably, if they have children, might have had to bear the brunt of helping kids with education. Urban real estate is probably going to suffer. It'll be interesting to see how the commercial market comes out of this. And certain pockets of higher education are probably going to lose ground, in particular the smaller four-year institutions. Many of them were vulnerable pre-pandemic. I think it's going to get a lot tougher for them. And if the pandemic accelerated progress in distribution of education remotely, that will chip away at that part of the market, I think, pretty significantly. Pandemic has definitely widened the gulf between haves and have-nots, but as noted, it's going to boost economic growth in a way by driving these productivity innovations. So we've never had this much innovation this quickly in our economy across so many sectors. And, we were lucky to have been an IT leader as a country. Speaking of winners and losers, Ipsos does this survey of happiness across countries. And they asked people into the pandemic, so this is kind of end of June, whether they're very happy, rather happy, or something less than that. And this is the percentage of people reporting that they are very happy or rather happy. Globally, it was only down 1%, which is kind of surprising. In China, they're the happiest, apparently. I don't know who gets to fill out the survey in China, if you have to be in the party, and who gets to see your responses to the survey. So you can take that as you want, but 93% of the Chinese at the end of June reported being very happy or rather happy. Maybe they enjoyed our distress. The Netherlands was second at 87%, and they had been holding constant. Further down, you see the United States, we were down 9%. Only 70% of our population reported being very or rather happy. And we had a lot of company in countries with similar characteristics, Australia and Canada, both down 8 and 9% respectively, although at a slightly higher level of happiness than us. Down at the bottom, Peru and Chile, big declines in happiness and very low levels of happiness. Spain and Mexico struggling as well. So in terms of happiness, China appears to have been a big winner, and Russia was as well. Maybe they delighted in our struggles. I don't know. You can concoct your own theories about this. I find it kind of interesting. And then here's just a snapshot of the base levels of happiness. The brighter green is happy. The red is unhappy, maybe a bit angry. And there you see a picture of our planet's happiness. So next up, Biden administration agenda. I think the markets these days are reacting to the prospects for a short-term boost from maybe a bigger stimulus package. It's a little surprising as we went into the election. I think people would have thought, well, a Trump win is probably good for the market. Biden win, maybe not so good, because a lot of the things that Trump did early on through executive orders and regulation were used as the reasoning for why the market did so well in the early years of the Trump administration. That appears to be on the road to being somewhat undone. So I think there's going to be some medium and long-term drags on growth, or at least the profitability of companies, because I think we're going to have, just in general, again, less business-friendly regulation and more consumer and worker-friendly regulation, which firms don't typically like, and can create a bit of paralysis and looking over your shoulder. And whether you're in the finance industry or whatever, you probably all know the sorts of things I'm talking about. Again, the weaker incentives to return to work when it is available, and then an ever-growing debt burden and possible tax hikes. All these things probably are not going to be viewed favorably for growth or profits. So I think that will start to chip away at the market outlook for people. And this growing tendency to govern by executive order, which has really escalated in recent presidencies, is only going to increase uncertainty for businesses and probably chip away at business confidence, which is important to long-term planning. The last thing that I'll be watching carefully is just how we get over the intense partisanship that we have today. I highly recommend, if you haven't seen it, the Netflix documentary, The Social Dilemma, which explains how the profit motive, when applied to a lot of social media companies, by design will drive us to providing pretty partisan information to people. Outlets will feed a point of view to an audience, and then audiences through algorithms are driven to even more content of a similar type. And then that's often, the content is bonding over how stupid the other people are that we don't like. It's not really as much about information, in a balanced way. And you even saw the partisan split on virus concerns. It was greater in December than it was in the spring, again, from an Ipsos survey, which seems odd because by December we knew a lot more about the reality of the virus, but different people are getting different pieces of information about it depending on what they watch. And so people actually got more polarized as the actual information became better and clearer. So that information divide has these political consequences. If people don't even agree on the facts, how are we ever going to agree on priorities and solutions? And the ideological gulf in Congress has just never been greater in our lifetimes. So this is a chart showing the distance between the party means on legislative actions. And so the higher the value is, the greater the gulf between the two parties. The Senate is in blue, the House is in red, and you can see we're in a place today that's as high as it's ever been. And the last time it was remotely near this level was prior to 1900. That's pretty staggering. That chart really shows, the second chart shows the same point. So, at the end of the day, leadership does matter. Progress on many issues is going to take leadership from elected officials and leaders in business, higher education, healthcare, et cetera. They have to be more out front, I would say. And elected leaders in particular cannot simply reflect the skewed information that's fed to their constituents. They have to do a better job of working together to get people toward common facts. The inability of politicians to work together, to me, is in stunning contrast to what you see more and more in the rest of our economy, where collaboration is really at a premium. So these informational, ideological, and identity divides, they're going to have to be mitigated by our elected leaders if we're going to make real progress on a lot of the big fundamental issues that have to be solved by government. So my 2021 predictions, I think the market will end the year about where it started. It might be a good first half, but I think it'll get a bit more sobering as the year goes on in terms of the outlook for corporate profitability. I think real GDP will grow robustly, and some of that will come through, probably about half of it through the labor force closing the employment gap, and the other half through productivity growth. I see wages going up a bit, in part because those people who can contribute in this new economy are going to command a premium. I think inflation will crack 2%. Interest rates will go up a bit by year end. The dollar will be stable. And the big economic story is going to be the surge in productivity from COVID innovations and the pockets of inflation where supply can't keep up. The wild cards will be, what exactly of the Biden agenda goes through, what form does it take, polarization, and our geopolitics. But I think there's some good underlying dynamics here provided by the private sector, because businesses adapted incredibly well to the COVID period. Our English words of the year aren't so surprising this year. 2016 was probably the high watermark of the English words of the year for me. I got in a little trouble at some of my economic presentations, I guess, because I reported dumpster fire was declared the word of the year, and I thought it might become more popular over the course of the year. But anyway, be that as it may, this year the words were COVID and pandemic, and the Oxford Dictionary apparently threw up their hands and said, we're not even having a word of the year. But you can see that these words that were kind of new words brought into common parlance lately reflect concerns about information and the information divide, misinformation, that sort of thing. They reflect issues related to identity and concerns about health. And, those aren't really great things. It was kind of nice back in 2012. It was hashtag, GIF, bluster, selfies. That was cute, but it's not so cute anymore. And I hope we can get to a better place. And speaking of happiness, I might have shown you this slide before, but I turned 60 this year. And what I'm excited about is when you chart unhappiness over time and age, what you find is that people's unhappiness tends to peak somewhere between their late 40s and early 50s. And I'm really in this steep path where my unhappiness is declining really sharply. And I've had a great year. And for those of you who are on my side of this curve, hang in there. The best is yet to come, apparently. My mom just turned 100 this year. She's not even on the chart. I think the sample size was too small. So they only went up to 80-year-olds. But I don't know that my mom thinks 100 is that great, actually, but she's doing remarkably well. And that's where I'm going to wrap it up today. I think I'm just about on time. Was hoping to get some questions in, and I will stop sharing my screen and let you guys drive the show from here.
Thank you, Mike. As expected, this was really very helpful, well organized, thoughtful, and we all learned a lot. I'm going to ask everyone to if you're willing, to turn your videos on, and then we'll move to gallery view. so that we can all see each other during the Q&A. And then we do have a number of questions in the chat already, and several of them really have to do with the commercial real estate market. So maybe I'll just kind of lump those together to start with, Mike, which is, from Megan Holbrook, what do you think will happen to the commercial real estate market given COVID shifts to virtual working conditions? Dan Nelson asks, might you provide a forecast of urban commercial real estate occupancy and ultimately valuation? And Darren says, to tail onto Dan's question, how will municipalities then justify the assessments if rental income drops? So a lot of questions there, but kind of related. And do you want me to take them one at a time?
So you have gone way beyond my depth of what I could say. I am not an alderman or a city councilman. I don't know how they're going to handle that. And, nobody, of course, knows for sure what will happen to commercial real estate. And it's definitely going to vary by city. I think that's certainly true. I think there are some cities that have become less desirable, not only from the pandemic, but maybe other kind of social challenges that they're facing or tax climate. And we're seeing people move to different locations, companies pick up and move. So there are going to be winners in this. And then, how is return to office actually going to work? So the people that I talk to in businesses like mine, which, I run a foundation with about 300 people, you might think of us as a bit like an insurance company. We got a sales force, we collect some money, we invest the money, and we pay out money, not in claims, but dollars to beneficiaries out of our endowment. But we've got kind of the same type of workforce. I expect, we surveyed our staff, 70% of them want to come back to a hybrid model, 25% want to come back and be fully remote, no going back to the office, and 5% want to go back the way it used to be. It seems like it's going to be hard to rationalize going back the way it used to be, because it's sort of hard for me to tell my staff we're not effective remotely because our productivity this year looked just like last year. If I showed you all the metrics we track, you could not detect that there had been a pandemic and everybody got booted out of the office and we had to work from home. So I think, there are a lot of reasons why that is good for individuals, families, the environment, and it's going to be hard not to make that a part of the milieu. So I think the challenge will be, we're not going to go to a model where we're all remote. So the 26% of people that feel that way in my organization will be disappointed, but I think we'll definitely be in a hybrid model, and how we work that out and whether it can enable us to reduce our real estate footprint is unclear. Some people will go to a hybrid model, but they'll want everyone back in a smaller fraction of the days. So it won't really reduce their real estate footprint. People might not be that keen on hoteling spaces anymore either. That kind of depends on how the virus concludes and how safe people feel a year from now. So, if the virus is still around, we're not going to reduce our footprint by half. And I'm going in today to an office somebody else was in yesterday, and I don't even know who that was. People won't like that. So I think there's a lot to be worked out yet to know for sure what's going to happen to commercial real estate. I think suburban areas, again, will fare a little bit better than the major big cities. I think Milwaukee has still great opportunity as a neighbor to Chicago, which looks to me to have much bigger problems in certain respects. And so I think the Milwaukee commercial market could hold up better than most, but what the overall, valuations will be a year from now, that's out of scope for me. I'm more of a macro economist. And
well, speaking of the macro, what are your thoughts as an economist on whether or not the pending relief package should include aid to cities and states?
That's I'd say more of a political question than an economic question. So if you were asking me economically, what's the most effective aid, we should really be delivering support to the individuals who've been harmed. And if you do that on a per head basis below a certain level of annual income, that's probably the most effective way to get things back and rolling. And then let different cities and regions fend for themselves. You know, when I worked at the Council of Economic Advisors, which Jamie had mentioned earlier, one of the big issues that came up for us is California was really struggling in the early 90s. And yet, you know, even though they had some secular challenges, it was the fifth wealthiest state in the country. And the administration at the time was considering an aid package to California. And I'm thinking, really, we're going to take money from people in West Virginia and Mississippi and give it to California? Like, they have enough wealth to deal with their problems. Their problems were short-term in nature and largely self-inflicted. So, you know, I think it's tricky to give block aid to cities and states in a fair way that doesn't look like it's going to be quite politicized. So I'm a much bigger fan of helping individual economic actors, households, to get us through this. And then, you know, we can look at whether we think there are going to be huge collateral implications from cities and states, but I think cities and states are oftentimes making their own beds, and I don't know that we should be in the business of bailing them out for choices that they've made.
Okay, so Ed Krishock asks, do you have a view on what will be most helpful to small businesses as we move through and out of the pandemic?
Well, you know, small businesses writ large, that's a hard thing to answer because, you know, small businesses have borne the brunt of this for sure. And I think those who've been able to survive will be in good shape, and they may actually have growth opportunities. You know, when you think about what might happen to the restaurant industry, you know, there's a potential good scenario out there, which is as bad as things are now and as many people that may have gone out of business. In places like Milwaukee or Madison, you've got people who are great chefs and they've been able to get through this. It's been painful, but they've gotten through it by, you know, having great product and have a great following, and they probably have higher quality and more interesting food than some of their competitors had. They may be able to, you know, take advantage of the situation of a lot of, you know, less expensive real estate, restaurant real estate, and extend their reach through the channels that come available in this transition. So whenever there's disruption, it can be a great opportunity, a great growth opportunity for people who've made it. I think the real trick will be managing your employee base. That will probably be the ultimate separator between the people who do great and the people who struggle. You know, younger workers have very different points of view on how they can get things done. And I think if you can leverage the unique talents of young workers in this new phase of our growth, then I think you've got a successful recipe. And that might require a little bit more flexibility than we had in the past.
Thank you for that. We have a couple of questions on the impact of regulation, and you did address that as you moved through the presentation, but while there may be now fewer business-friendly regulatory moves, especially those that targeted specific industries, companies that were friendly to the previous administration, how do you see the more traditional democracy and rule of law friendly approach of a Biden administration affecting the economy?
Well, so it's trying to unpack the democracy and rule of law friendly. So I guess maybe by that, you know, the Trump administration would deal with companies kind of one-on-one and sometimes put pressure on them to achieve objectives. And it was a little more of a transactional, I think, style of working. I don't know that doesn't go on in other administrations, but it's done more quietly. I'm not really enough of an insider in government of late to say how that is. But I do think it's very useful to just at a high level think about, again, regulation as, is someone inclined to sort of take the side of, we need to protect consumers from businesses that would rip them off. We need to protect workers from companies that will mistreat them. Or do you have more faith in companies and competition that we need to get things out of the way so companies can grow and create value and let consumers and workers decide who they want to buy from and who they want to work for? And for economic growth, I'll just confess, I'm on the side of the latter. I'm exposed to enough companies that I think by and large, companies are in a competitive environment, mostly doing the right things. Inevitably, there are tough situations where, if a company's struggling, there'll be tension with their workers because we're fighting over the limited dwindling surplus that we're creating as an organization, and that's never pretty. And then there's always allegations. But you have to have laws that protect workers and laws that protect consumers. But take the financial markets. I'm connected to the mutual fund industry, and the amount of overhead in the mutual fund industry to me is staggering. All of us can choose from thousands upon thousands of mutual funds. And if we feel we're not getting a good deal, we can also get an index fund or an ETF. And yet you've got a bizarre Byzantine regulatory structure where these funds have to spend millions and millions of dollars a year on board members and board meetings and counsel for everybody, the management company, the board, etc. And it's a pretty simple business, and it's incredibly competitive. So there's just sector after sector. That's just one example where there's probably too much. We just don't go in and freshen these things up. We create these regulations and we move on to the next thing where somebody had a problem. We create new regulations, but we don't often go back and say, wow, these regulations from the 1940 Act, by the way, in mutual funds, a little bit out of date in a world where you got index funds and ETFs. We should just let portfolio managers offer to manage money for people for a fee. And if you want to pay that fee for a smart person, go ahead. So I'm a little more on the side of, I think consumers can make pretty good choices. And, we're even learning people on the Reddit message boards can make pretty good investment decisions too, it seems. So,
well, I guess I have two questions that I definitely want to get to, and there's still a bunch here. But of course, one of them has to do with if you think that the GameStop Robinhood investing scenario will have long-term impacts on the market.
I don't. I think retail investors are more interested in investing than ever before. And they should be, because we've kind of just seen the democratization of finance where we've made it pretty inexpensive for people from their own home to do their own investing. And, like many other sectors, technology has now kind of disintermediated a bit the asset management business. And, many people will still take advantage of the skills that financial advisors and professional investors can offer them. But for a lot of people, they don't want to do that. And now it's easier than ever to do it yourself. So that is here to stay. The phenomenon of the Reddit message board folks banding together and attacking different things, that's going to go on for a little bit, but I don't know how long exactly, because, it ends up being a game of chicken, with GameStop. If you got in at 150, right now you're looking at a 25% loss today. So, I don't know how long that will go on, but they identified a problem in the market where banks collectively had extended more short positions than there were shares in GameStop. And once people realize that, then you've got, the combustibility that can happen in a short squeeze where people charge into that market knowing there's this problem, forcing the people to buy more shares than exist because they've got all these short positions. That drives the price up further. that creates even more frenzy. And, that's what we witnessed. And, if only it could have happened that way for our friends at Costs, they got a part of it, but probably not what GameStop wound up with. But, I don't think that's going to continue to go on, because people be a lot more careful about their short interest positions and the footprints they leave. And, and I'll just say, short sellers sound like bad people. A lot of the people that went into short selling went into it because they thought some of the companies were maybe not all they were marketing themselves to be. And they were kind of in it to protect investors too. So, there's a lot of different sides to these stories. And if you didn't see the Saturday Night Live opening skit this week, you should go look for it. It was pretty interesting.
It was pretty good.
I thought it gave a great, if you want to learn about GameStop at a high level in 1 minute, it was awesome.
Definitely go back to that. I'm leaving a lot of questions on the table here, but here's one from Megan Holbrook on what do you think the impact of a $15 minimum wage would be?
I had two pretty good labor economists on a broadcast that I do called the UW Now. It's a live stream we do on Tuesday nights. I'll have another one tonight, but Erica Groshin, who was the commissioner of the Department of Labor for the United States for 4 years through 2017, I think, was on the show. And then Noah Williams, who runs the Center for Research on the Wisconsin Economy. And we talked about that. And, I probably agree with Noah. Erica pointed out rightly that there have been some pretty good studies that showed the effects of raising the minimum wage on employment. So a lot of people, traditional price theory would say, if we raise the minimum wage, inevitably there will be some jobs that don't add that much value, and those jobs will no longer be available if we raise the wage above the wage rate that employee could earn, let's say. So that's kind of basic economics. Well, when some of the best economists, best labor economists, David Card and his co-author Kruger at Princeton, they looked at a lot of cases where one state raised the minimum wage, the other one didn't. And they looked at border towns to see if there was any evidence that employment evolved differently in these towns that, for all intents and purposes, were essentially the same, but you had this natural experiment. And what they found was shockingly little impact on employment of increases in the minimum wage. In some cases, it went the wrong direction. But what they were observing were changes to the minimum wage that are like 60 cents, $1 maybe, not very big. And this whole notion of a national minimum wage has always struck me as bizarre. Like maybe $15 an hour in Seattle is great. And I'm not sure that's right in Milwaukee. I can guarantee you it's not right in Rhinelander. So it's a little bit of, I would guess that if we take drastic measure on minimum wage, we will see adverse consequences for employment, and they will be disproportionately in some rural areas. Maybe there'll be some workaround, I don't know, but it'll probably drive more people, young people especially, into jobs that are maybe black market jobs that just don't get reported.
Well, I know I said that was the last question, but we have one sort of general question here from Alex Chu, which we could end on, which is, what news sources do you typically read or look to on a daily basis?
Oh, I just, on my streaming TV, I now watch a news channel called Newsy, news with a Y at the end, which is pretty diligent at reporting what happened, who said what, and not editorializing too much. I do enjoy clicking across more extreme platforms just to see what choices are being made in what they're choosing to highlight, and of course you can go to Fox and you'll hear about what did AOC say today, and then you can go to CNN and you can hear about what did MTG say today, and you flip it around and they never mention those people. It's amazing. And I have to watch some of these things because my family is all over the map. So when I talk to my brother from the UP, I at least have to know what's been going into his head so I can kind of appropriately interpret where he's coming from. But it's a crazy, crazy world. So I read a lot of Bloomberg. because I feel like Bloomberg, has to be sort of governed a little bit by their viewership, which wants accurate financial information to make decisions. So in the long run, they've got to be pretty down the middle. I'm always interested in the Wall Street Journal. And for fun, I every day look at something called the Browser, which gives me 5 long-form journalism pieces on a variety of subjects, not often economics, but sometimes. But it's just outstanding writing and really interesting topics. And so that is more for fun. On the weekends, I do enjoy Fareed Zakaria's show, GPS, Global Public Square. And I probably watch Meet the Press, like to hear what political leadership is saying. But, political leadership, I'll tell you, people need to figure out how to work better together. I can't understand how we're letting this go on where, it's like 30 years of finger pointing over who started it. I mean, I'm sick of that, like, could we just start getting a couple things done? But I think we're already at the point where it's going to break down again. And, everybody's working on their narrative for who caused it to break down this time. And
well, thank you. I know that we do need to close this up, and we're leaving a lot of questions on the table. So maybe we'll have to bring you back before before 2022 and see what's going on mid-year.
we can see what's wrong with my forecast.
see how things are going come summer. So thank you.
Always great to see all of you. Thanks for being here today, and thanks for your questions. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. And I'll turn this over to Darren to close us out.
Mike, thanks for that presentation. Always look forward to that. Had the pleasure of introducing you last January. Would look forward to introducing you again next January, or at any point you're able to join us. Again, really appreciate you being here with us today. In honor of your talking with us, we will be making a donation to the YWCA of Southeast Wisconsin, whose mission is eliminating racism, empowering women, and promoting peace, justice, freedom, and dignity for all. Thank you for being here. A few other announcements. I hope to see you all at our snack program this Thursday at noon with the Urban Ecology Center. Join us next week to hear from the folks at Milwaukee PBS and Dasha Kelly, Kima Hamilton on implicit bias. Michelle will now end our program with our Rotary Now More Than Ever video series. So again, thank you to all of you for being here today. This meeting is adjourned.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Conversations that I've been part of earlier this year and also last year, we talked about what is the meaning of membership. And there are really 2 dimensions that came up in these conversations and meetings. One is, how do I extend myself? The other one is, how do I expand myself? So I'll take the expanding myself as, how do I personally grow as part of Rotary? And the programming is amazing, right? I get to learn, get to hear from people all around the world who are doing such interesting things to really contribute to their communities and their spheres of influence. The extending myself dimension is also very interesting, which is, how am I part of this organization that does good in such a range of ways, from contributing to various social services in the community, arts, contributing to different pillars in the organization, and really creating a legacy to move forward. And so we certainly have had a history of over 100 years of visible, tangible, and also intangible marks, positive marks that Rotary has been able to be part of and really help lift all boats in what we do.